Thank you, Gabriele. This roundtable, this panel discussion is really challenging due to the high level of quality of our speakers. I'm going to trick you both now. And they are real specialists, and also due to the expectations with reference to the objectives we set ourselves. It's a really long title, Tools to Identify the Sectoral and Geographic Perimeters of Multinational Operating in Europe and trying to match them with the trade unions situations. I have Romuald Jagodiński on my left side. He's database manager of ETUI. And then on my right side, there's Peter Kerkhoff, who is a researcher from Eurofund. And they both have a great experience. I would like to thank them as of now because despite all their engagements and the activities they're involved in, we have tried to get in touch with each other. We had an exchange of email, and they prepared a high-quality material with great value added. I asked them to express their opinions with reference to the activities and to give us a report about the activities with reference to research and data analysis that their organization and institutions do on a daily basis, and to try and have a long-sighted approach and to see whether we can have these worlds talk to one another. And I'll ask them whether there are parallel worlds, separate worlds that can exchange information, or whether they are already doing so, and if so, in what ways, and how they can deal with all the topics that we have seen during the course of this day. Why this? This to avoid the metaphor of the Babel Tower, so as everyone uses their own codes for data analysis. And at least it's been about 10 years that on a daily basis we talk about concepts such as open data, and usable and interchangeable. And because we as trade unions, starting from the Italian reality of field camps, we have our own internal databases, and we tried to have them talk with other databases, but this has a series of difficulties. So, as Peter was asking me earlier on, before our intervention, why this requirement or this need, and I answered him because as we have more data, more input, it's probable for us to produce and interpret them and to produce more outputs. So as to try and overcome a part of the problems that appeared with the MuMMIA research. So I would like to give the floor to Romek, who's going to talk to us about... Oh, it was right. It was right. Romuald Romek for his friends. Okay. So I give the floor to Romek, and I ask him to introduce his presentation, and then we will have an exchange of opinions after Peter's presentation, so that we probably may do some common reasonings to overcome all the problems in communication and the problems of asymmetries we mentioned earlier.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to speak in English, so those who need the headphones, they can put them on now, please. Big thanks on my part to the organizers for including us in the panel and in the research itself, because it's not the first time that we talk to each other with Massimo and with Gianluca and Gabriele about the project. We have... Okay. So, good afternoon to everybody. And thanks to the organizers for having us here, because it's not the first time actually that we've been invited to the workshops in frames of this project. I've participated to a meeting, to a workshop in Brussels, and we've been in exchange with Gianluca, with Massimo and Gabriele over emails. I'm very glad to be here because I think really that the topic of the panel and the project itself is very, very important. This is because of my work, of course. Maybe a couple of words about myself. I work as a researcher at the ETUI, and I'm a member of a unit that is solely devoted to worker participation issues. We deal with various forms of representation. This is representation in European Works Councils, transnational representation of workers in SEs. It's okay. It's basically this. So it's the first slide. It's okay. I'll give you a sign. Yeah. So I'm part of this unit that deals also with European companies, SEs, and also with worker representation on board level. So there are different forms of that worker representation. There is another colleague also that works with us on information and consultation on national level. So we are basically trying to embrace the issue of worker representation from various angles, and in reference to various instruments that have been put by the European legislators at disposal of workers. And I think it's very, very important that we do it because it gives us the edge over employers, organizations, and over employers themselves in negotiations or even in terms of exerting pressure on the European Commission. The employers, as you probably know, do not have a specific research institute, do not have an institutionalized research behind their actions. The trade unions have here a great advantage in numerous forms, and MuMMIA is one of those, examples of that advantage, I think. Without further ado, I'd like to go on now to speaking about the database itself, the European Works Council's database. I will first start by saying a couple of words about where the database comes from. I'll then go on to presenting you the structure of the database on European Works Councils, and then a couple of figures that are based on research on worker representation in European companies. These are the two probably most important pillars of international worker representation in Europe nowadays. And I will then conclude by showing you two websites that are publicly available and that can be used as a tool for worker representatives by EWC members in negotiations. So these are the three stages of my presentation. Just a brief word about where the database comes from and how it was started. The EWC database actually was started in 1995. And at that time it was the beginning of the... can you still hear me? No? Yeah. Okay. It was shortly after the introduction of the first EWC directive in 1994, when the trade unions started to collect information about European Works Councils. And it was continued over years. And funnily enough, actually, Peter Kerkhoffs, who is at the Eurofund now, he used to work on the database himself for a long time. He actually brought me to the research on EWCs, so it's thanks to him that I'm sitting at the same table now a couple of years later. And I'm very grateful for that to him. Since 2006, the database is online. And since 2010, we have a couple of new substantial components of the database that I'll speak about later. The database, I mean, any collection of data on transnational forms of representation is really, really a tricky matter. And I think Peter and now Massimo, everyone who worked on that kind of data can confirm that it is not a simple thing. The directive basically speaks, the EWC directive, uses as a criterion for identifying companies that should have an EWC, very simple criteria. It should be a company that has in total at least 1,000 employees and in 2 countries at least 150 employees. Sounds simple enough, doesn't it? But in reality, the employee figures are by far the most difficult data to get hold of. There are some additional criteria about the company structure, but the gist of the requirements is actually the employee data, and this is the real pain in the neck. The database, in order to be able to embrace the complexity of the EWC of transnational worker representation, the database needs to be structured in a very clear manner, and therefore we actually have 3 components of the database. The first component is a sub-database of multinational companies that fall within the scope of the EWC directive. That means that fulfill the criteria that I've just mentioned. The second part of the database, the second component or a second sub-database, is actually a database collecting information about the European Works Councils themselves. And the third part of the database is a sub-database devoted to European companies. I'll come to speak to that a bit later. This is the very basic division, this is the very basic structure, but there are also other components, smaller components of the database that we try to collect data on, where we try to structure the information that we gather from trade unions, from EWCs themselves, so that we get the fullest possible picture of worker representation in Europe. But this is not the only division, this is not the only structure. That was more kind of a horizontal structure of the database. But in order to be able to grasp the complexity of the EWC sub-database itself, we needed to divide it into 3 levels. And I'm not going to speak too much about it, have no fear. I know it can be boring, but this is just to show how complex the data collection itself is. So in order to be able to say anything about EWCs, we need to first of all know in what companies those EWCs operate and what companies are covered. Second of all, we need to know in what companies which EWCs are established. And every EWC is based on at least one EWC agreement itself. But very rarely it's only one agreement. In numerous cases, these are multiple agreements you have an installation agreement that sets up an EWC, then you have revised versions of the agreement, you have amendments to the agreements. The colleagues who work on EWCs, who are members of EWCs, can tell you about many other documents and agreements that they sign throughout their career, throughout the life of EWC. You have what was referred to earlier on by Volker. You have transnational company agreements, which is yet another form of agreements signed by EWCs. So there is really a myriad of different texts, agreements, declarations that an EWC can sign throughout its lifetime. So I'll stop there, but I think it gives you an overview of really, if you want to do it in a structured way, what kind of requirements it brings with it. And Massimo and colleagues working on the MuMMIA.Project have already experienced that, I think, and that's when Massimo referred to difficulties in data collection. I believe that's what he wanted to say. If we go on now, one more, please. Yeah. The database then at this stage collects information about how many companies there are, how many EWCs there are, and how many agreements there are. But this is only a quantitative analysis, if you wish, which is complex enough already at this stage. But in order to be able to make the most of the analysis itself, we thought that it is necessary to go a bit further than that. It's not only to know that there is an agreement, it's not only to know that there is an EWC, but the purpose is also to know what is in the agreement itself. Who are the EWC members? Where do they come from? Which countries are represented? Which countries have a mandate but are not represented in an EWC? So all that kind of information was identified as crucial in order to be able to say something qualitative about the EWCs themselves. And since 2009-2010, we have had a project of merging two databases that had existed in the past. There was a database by the Social Development Agency and the database by ETY. And basically some of the data collection was doubled, but they were complementary in the fact that the ETY database was collecting information about the quantitative aspects of EWCs, and the SDA was doing research on the content of agreements. And we thought that by unifying those two databases, we will get an even bigger impact and we'll be able to say more about EWCs than by having them separately. And Marina Monaco, who is in the room here, started on the project with myself, where we went on to analyze the content of the agreements. And in the database currently we have over 1600s of agreements that were signed by various EWCs. This is by far not the entity of EWC agreements that were signed, but I think that we are close to, well, 85–90% of all agreements that have been signed by EWCs. It's an estimation. So we tried to look at what is in those agreements in order to be able to advise EWC members in negotiations on what can be negotiated, how far can you go, what are the good and bad examples in EWC agreements, what are the standards in other countries, because this was the feedback that we've been receiving from many EWC members and from many sectoral federations. That they would like to know what are the standards in other sectors. For instance, when industrial or the European Metalworkers Federation used to negotiate an agreement, they had those multisectoral companies that had activities in many sectors, and they wanted to know what are the standards in the financial sector, what are the standards in the tourism sector, because they had, for instance, a company that was active in 2, 3, or 4 sectors. So we were receiving these requests for data more and more often because the colleagues wanted to be able to negotiate more efficiently with the management. And therefore we developed in 2009, we developed a questionnaire or a analytic framework that was querying every EWC agreement by means of around 90 to 100 criteria. And we are trying to fill in that criteria by looking at the contents of the data, of the agreements themselves. And I will not go into the detail to tell you about every single question that we asked there, but we asked about, in general, constitutional issues. That means what is the law that applies to an EWC agreement, what are the parties to the agreement, whether this is a employee-only EWC or a joint EWC. We looked at the geographical scope and the distribution of seats. We looked at how the meetings are organized, the plenary meetings, the extraordinary meetings, who chairs the meetings, etc., etc. What is the procedure for calling extraordinary meetings in cases of restructuring? We looked at the definitions of information and consultation, but not only at the definitions, but a bit under the surface also. What are the competences? What is the scope of those definitions? What are the agenda items that are discussed by an EWC? We looked at something that was mentioned earlier on at the language facilities for EWC members, and a very important aspect of their activity, because we felt that it's necessary to be able to say whether the agreement guarantees for the members interpretation, for instance, interpretation in all languages or only in 2 or 3 selected languages, whether the EWC members have access to agreements that are sent to them beforehand, before the meeting, in their native language, or whether they need to resort to some kind of a privately organized translation at home, I don't know, using Google Translate, and struggling with the language already in advance of the meeting. We looked at how the select committee, the presiding committee, is working. What is the composition? What are the competences? So a lot of questions, and we've only just finished the project. It took us 3 years to actually go through all the 1,600 plus agreements. We haven't started the analysis of the outcomes yet, but we have the empirical data for that. And I'm really very glad, and I must say also relieved, that it's done, because it was a mammoth task. But those results will be made available, I think, within a year or something like that. Already now we have identified a group of the so-called good practices and bad practices, so solutions, for instance, in the area of transnational competence of an EWC. What are the good provisions in the agreements that one could copy and use in negotiations? What are provisions on transnationality that limit this competence of an EWC in a way that obstructs an effective work of EWC? And those good and bad practices we have in, I think, around 70 to 90 different areas, and it's still being developed. So these are the tools that we are preparing for further negotiation, and I think it becomes very, very important nowadays with the recast directive in place, where we observe a new wave of negotiations. And now, after this lengthy explanation of how complex it is to work with the data, I would like to reward you a bit by showing a couple of results that you can achieve, that you can, how you can show all this laboriously collected data, and what one can do, what information does the database actually produce after all that hard work of putting in the data. We can see on this slide, by having all the data that I mentioned earlier on, we can produce a clear overview how the number of EWCs developed over years. We can say not only how many EWCs are there today, but by each year, actually, we can say how many new EWCs were created, how many EWCs were dissolved, how many EWCs were dissolved because of a merger, how many EWCs were dissolved because of a merger in Hungary, for instance. So you can go very, very deep in terms of finding the relevant information once you have it already in the database. And it really is an advantage over the employers, because trade unions, by means of the European Trade Union Institute, but this is a collective effort of the federations, of national trade unions, of individual EWC members who provide the data, allow us to discuss and show the Commission, the European Commission, listen, there are loopholes in this and that area, because the Commission does not have a separate database. It's really the trade unions who have this unique resource, and that gives us the position to say there is action needed, there are amendments to law needed in this particular area. Okay, a couple of more slides showing what are the reasons for establishment. So you can, you can break the data down by what is the reason for establishment of a particular EWC in a particular year. We have prevalent numbers of installations from scratch, but we also observe a number of EWCs that are developed as spin-offs from existing companies, that are created from mergers of 2 companies that, by means of a merger, fulfill the criteria of the EWC. I should maybe come back to the first slide, actually. I'm sorry to jump like that, because I think I've skipped that one. It's back. Still back. Yeah, that's it. Exactly. I'm sorry for that jump over. But currently, the most recent figures are, we estimate, or we know of, around 1,260 EWCs that have ever existed. That's the total number of EWCs that have ever been created that we know of. But I emphasize the fact that there are probably more EWCs, not many more, but some more, of which we haven't found out because they were not unionized, there weren't any trade union members on those EWCs. At the moment, as far as we know, there are 1,030 EWCs that are in operation, and there are 955 EWCs, multinational companies in which an EWC is established. That means that in some multinational companies you have more than one EWC, and this is legally possible. You can have the so-called sectoral EWCs. So sometimes multinational companies active in more than one sector, they would have an EWC for the tourism sector, for the financial services sector, and for metal production, metal manufacturing sector. It gives them the flexibility of focusing on the sector itself and not discussing general issues on the general EWC, which can lead to a situation that the colleagues active working in the tourism sector of this particular company would need to hear and discuss things that are relevant only for the metal sector. So those sectoral EWCs allow to go more into detail, but this is not the only solution. There are around 60 EWCs in negotiation. Probably there are more, but there are around 60 that we know of. And in total, there have been less than 200 EWCs that were dissolved for some reason, either due to a merger or due to the company not fulfilling the criteria anymore. It is another estimation that I'm making here. There are probably more than 1,400 companies that still fulfill the criteria of the directive but do not have an EWC. And I'm very, very cautious about this figure. It's an estimation because of the earlier difficulties that I mentioned. It's extremely difficult to identify companies in Europe that fulfill those two simple criteria, 1,000 employees in total and 2 times 150 employees in Europe. It sounds so simple, but it's so bloody difficult. We have tried many ways. We have tried to collect the data ourselves, which turned out eventually not possible because it is a huge task. We tried to buy external commercially available databases which weren't performing either. So you have a company that has a couple of hundred of researchers that work only on finding out information about companies, and still they cannot deliver 100% guaranteed information about those multinational companies. And there is no legal obligation for companies to report about the employee figures and about their structures. And this is the biggest difficulty, actually, because if we would have this obligation imposed on all companies in Europe, I mean, the matter is clean and solved, and it saves us a lot of work and it gives us a lot of certainty. But of course, it's not possible due to the objections of the employers' organizations. In total, there are around, it's another estimation, but around 17, 18 million of workers employed in companies that have an EWC. So we are talking here big numbers of people who actually, at least theoretically, have access to information about transnational activities of a company. And in total, we estimate also that there are around 16 to 21,000 EWC members themselves. If we multiply the number of EWCs that we've ever had by an average number of 15 to 20 EWC members per EWC, these are the numbers we are talking about. These are very rough estimations, but it's just to give you an idea that we've already, throughout those 15 or more than 15 years of EWC legislation in Europe, we have an army of people who have heard about an EWC, who have been affected, or who have actually sat on the EWC. Now go on to finish the presentation. I will not show you all the data, but we can clearly say how many EWCs have there been created in a specific country. And here, interestingly, Germany has the most number of EWCs, but it's also the United States, the US companies that are active in Europe that have a lot of EWCs, but they differ quite significantly, because usually the US companies, they want to just tick off the obligation of having an EWC, but in terms of quality, it's often below what the European-based companies provide in terms of information and consultation. We can skip the next one. This is, I've already shown that. We can also show the sectors. We can find out the sectors in which companies are EWCs are active. And here, by far, as was already mentioned earlier on during the day, the metal sector is by far the most numerous one, but also the chemicals have a large number of EWCs, and then you have building and woodwork as a big federation, and also the tourism, agriculture, that means effort, who host a big number of EWCs. I'm drawing to an end, really, just giving you a couple of indications about how the EWCs are also distributed. Not every company has the same chance of having an EWC, so to say, statistically. The bigger the company, the bigger the probability of an EWC. So it means that it's much easier to establish an EWC in very large companies, but surprisingly also in the smaller multinational companies that employ between 1,000 and 5,000 of employees. It is similarly more easy to establish an EWC in a company that is active in a big number of countries. Those multinational companies that have activities in more than 10 countries account for more than 50% of EWCs. So the bigger the company in terms of activity and the bigger the company in terms of employees, the easier it should be theoretically to establish an EWC. I will conclude now by pointing towards one other aspect of our activities at ETUI that we focus on. These are also SEs, the European companies, but as they are not the gist of the project themselves, I will not speak about them. You can find all the data concerning the SEs and EWCs on two websites. This is at the end. Exactly, there are two. Yeah, that's this address, ewcdb.eu, is the portal for the EWC database. This is where you can find all the information that I've spoken about and much more. You can find information about, for instance, court cases in which the EWCs were involved, what was the content of the court case, etc., etc. So there are also statistics. If you want to find some of the statistics that I've shown, you can find them on this website as well. And if you're looking for information about the SEs, but also on other forms of worker representation, this is the next website, worker participation. Gabriela, if you could, one more. The workerparticipation.eu is a broader website that gives information about the worker representation in SEs, in EWCs, in national works councils, on board level. As you know, we have legislation that allows employee representatives to sit on supervisory boards or administrative boards. And you can find on this website, you can also find information about industrial relations in individual countries. What is the trade union structure? You can make comparative tables when you go to an EWC meeting and you don't know anything about the structure of Italian trade unions. and you will have colleagues from France, you can simply choose those two countries and find information that you want to know about those countries. Trade unions, collective bargaining, information consultation legislation. So I hope I haven't bored you to death, but I think there is a lot of data available by trade unions and to trade unions already. And I think it is really a huge challenge to use it now and also to get the feedback from the users themselves, that is from trade unionists, on how we, the researchers, can improve it. Thank you for your attention.
Io ringrazio Romek.
I thank Romek. I must confess that when you showed the data, I was really touched. I was deeply touched. So I have to freeze and then resume my reflection after the presentation of by Peter. We also had the possibility to look at the update of all the data that Gabriela had presented, which had been frozen some time ago. Then I'll stop here about the comments, and then maybe we will have a brief debate. We as an organization nailed this session. We nailed it right on because we discovered that we have the guilty party. Well, the guilty party has a negative tone, but he's the one who worked at this massive information since the beginning, and now in another role in another organization he's performing another type of research. And also about that organization, we have massive data. We're talking about more than 11,000 records in several sectors, several areas of activity. So now I leave the floor to Peter Kirkos, and then we'll have a debate in light of his presentation.
Good afternoon, everybody, for inviting me here. I was asked to say something about the Eurofound representativeness studies that are tre parole, and I will take them one by one. I will first of all tell you something more about Eurofound, what the European Foundation for the Improvement of Living and Working Conditions is, what kind of organization we are and how we work. Secondly, I will try to stimulate some thoughts with you about what we could understand under the concept of representativeness and what this could mean for social partners. And finally, I will present you, just like Romek did, I will present our REP studies to you, and maybe then later on for the debate or for the conversations later on we can discuss how you can make eventually use of these representativeness studies of the European Foundation. So that are the three parts of my presentation. First, Eurofound. Second, what means representativeness. Thirdly, what are these REP studies about and how they work. The European Foundation is a tripartite agency of the European Commission, established in 1975, a year or two later after Ireland joined the EU. So we're based in Dublin, and we carry out comparative socio-economic research with a staff of about 115 persons and a budget of about 20 million. If you wonder why the grass is so green before the building of the foundation, then just to explain it to you, I brought some Irish weather with you today. Doing industrial relations research in a tripartite agency is something special. So I have already heard from several speakers before that it's not always easy to understand each other between trade unions, already only between trade unions, but it's also not always easy to understand each other or to have a common view on things between employers from 27, soon 28 countries, from trade unions from 28 countries, and from people from the ministry from 28 countries. And indeed, we have a tripartite governing board with from each of these 27, from now on soon 28 countries, one person from the trade unions, one person from the employers, and one person from the Ministry of Labor, plus a few people from the ETUC and from Business Europe and from the European Commission. It makes a small European Parliament, and they all agree on our annual work program and on our 4-year work program, and that means that a lot of good ideas fall between the chairs or between all the discussions. On top of this tripartite governing board, we have also advisory committees in which we have to present progress reports of each of the research projects, and also before we have a report that can be published, these advisory committees have to give a green light, and in them there are 2, 3, 4 representatives from the trade unions, 2, 3, 4 from the employers, a few from the ministries, and somebody from the European Commission as well, and a few from the Ministries of Labor. So all these tripartite bodies, our governing board, our advisory committee, they decide on our work program, and they filter the things we can do and also the reports before they get published. Our mission is to provide knowledge and expertise to the social partners and the policymakers by monitoring, analyzing changes that take place in the EU, by see and try to understand these developments and to publish and to share and communicate all these findings. And all the time, of course, we have to respect the 3 perspectives, the one of the workers, the trade unions, the one of the employers, and the one of governments. Few things we are doing, and you can find more information on this, is a European Working Conditions Survey, a Quality of Life Survey, and a Company Survey that are huge things that deliver a lot of data, and there are a lot of reports on it about. There are also networks where more like news information is presented, and it's IRO, UCO, and ERM. IRO, I think, is especially very interesting, where you have like also country profiles on how industrial relation works in all the different member states. And in the ERM, you have you see reports and overview on restructuring also in multinational companies and in specific sectors. Might be interesting for you. So besides that, we are in our unit, we are doing a lot of CARS, we call it, comparative analytical reports. They are based, in fact, on a questionnaire that we develop on a specific topic. We send this questionnaire to our national correspondents in each of the member states. They send replies to this questionnaire back, and on that basis we produced an overview reports. Representativeness studies, I will come back to that immediately, and we also do case study research. Last year we did a significant project on European Works Council case studies, and Volker Teljohan was one of the team members in this project. So to finalize this presentation of the European Foundation, so that you know where I'm coming from, is I think good for you to know that we have 3 research units, so 3 main blocks of areas in which we work. One is on living conditions and the quality of life. Second one is on employment and change, and there they look at restructuring, for example, in a macroeconomic perspective. And I work for the working conditions and industrial relations unit, and I wanted to give you one more possibility of a project in our sector. It might maybe give you an idea one day to do something together with us, and that's a stakeholder inquiry service. This is like a project that is possible on the basis of a request of social partner. Most of the time, I must say almost always, it's a joint request of trade unions and employers. So they request us to do a study, and then we can make a tailor-made study for them, answering certain questions. Like, for example, for the moment I'm running such a stakeholder inquiry study for the steel sector, where we're looking at how works councils and trade unions and employers are dealing with with stress at work in 3 steel companies. And on the basis of these case studies, we can then maybe later on, the social partners can build out some guidelines how they can work with that. So other ways how we can work together would be if you would have an idea for a project, and this would be integrated in our work program. But that, of course, must always be in line with our 4-year work program that's adopted last year and runs from 2013 and 2016. So might always be interesting to take a look at it. It's available on our website. And if this inspires you to propose a certain project, I would say it's always welcome. So I hope with that introduction, I have explained you where I come from, and if later on the question is going to come about cooperation, I think this will help you to understand how we work, and that it's not simply having a good idea that is enough for us to implement it. It also needs to go through our governing board, and having convinced all these people is as you might have understood after this, not always the easiest thing to do. But nevertheless, all the data that we have, all the reports that we have, are available online on our website, and with that you can do, I would say, almost whatever you like. So this brings me to the last words, or the last 2 words of my presentation. So representativeness studies, and first of all, I would like to take a look at you, or think together to you what representativeness could mean. So it means something in statistical terms and in political terms. In statistical terms, you have very often this concept of representativeness, and there it is all about the level of accuracy of how a certain, the characteristics, the reality of a group is reflected on a small sample. So with other words, how good can you come to conclusions about the reality of a whole group by only studying a small sample, a few cases or a smaller group. So this is a statistical question, if a sample is representative for the whole reality. In political terms, it's all about the characteristics of social democracy. You have on the one hand representative democracy, and on the other hand you would have direct participation where everybody speaks for him or herself, but there is no, how shall I say, articulation of a general interest of a group. While if you have a representative democracy, you have elected or appointed representatives who represent a group of people. The question how they do it, this is something which is open for the debate. You could say, how do representatives make use of their role, how their negotiation capacity, with or without a precise mandate for their role. I find one idea that Edmund Burke phrased a long time ago is he said that the duty of a representative is not only to express the wishes of those persons that he or she represents, but also to use his or her own judgment. So I think leadership is very important. Internal consultation of those persons you represent is probably another very important element. But these are all, I think, elements of this concept of representativeness. So what does this mean now for social partners? If we look at the different countries, industrial relations system, then representativeness is a precondition in many countries for social partners to take part in social dialogue or in collective bargaining. If you look at works councils, it's part of the election process of representativeness to become a member of a works council. And in some countries, you have the possibility that the collective bargaining agreement made by unions who are only representative in a certain number of companies, and the employers' organization was only having affiliates in certain companies, that agreement can be made erga omnes, generally binding, but for that, so that it has a bit like a force of law, but for that there are in some countries, like in Germany, for example, and there are in a series of countries there are minimum criteria, and that our minimum requirements are very often linked to the level of representativeness in a sector, for example. So then I'm coming to the REP studies that we implement. For us, it is in fact a question of the European Commission. The European Commission asks us to do these REP studies for the simple reason that in Article 154 of the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union, it says that social partners have the right to be consulted on certain issues. So imagine that the Commission at a certain moment wants to come up with a directive dealing with, let's say, protection of workers working in with certain chemical substances. Then on the basis of this article of the European Treaty, the social partners in the chemical sector would have the right to be consulted on this issue before the Commission is proposing a legislation to the Council. Now the Commission needs to know if they're obliged to consult the social partners on the basis of this treaty, who are the social partners that has to be invited to be consulted on an issue dealing with that specific sector. So that's the first reason why we are doing REP studies on behalf of the Commission. The second one is that it's a criterion to set up a sector social dialogue committee. So if, for example, tomorrow in the glass sector, where there is still not yet a European sector social dialogue committee, they would want to set up such a body, which would give them the opportunity to meet trade unions and employers from all the countries in Brussels, paid by the European Commission, then the criterion to accept, for the Commission to accept the establishment of such a sector social dialogue committee is a certain level of representativeness. Finally, and I think this is the most important point, is that if you have a sector social dialogue committee, like for example for the commerce sector, there is such a committee for I think about 41 or 42 sectors, there are such committees. If such a committee would make an agreement, so if the trade unions and the employers at the sector level, at European, make an agreement, then on the basis of Article 155 of the treaty, the Commission has to put this agreement towards the Council and to the European Parliament, and they have simply to accept the text of the agreement as it is and transform it in a European directive. So the European Parliament, all these people sitting there, they don't have any right to change any word on an agreement made between the social partners. Also the Council of Ministers, they cannot change it. They simply have to accept what the social partners have agreed. Subsequently, this directive needs to be transposed in all the EU member states by all the governments in all the 27, soon 28 countries. So that makes that the people in the European Sector Social Dialogue Committee have in fact legislative power all over Europe to make an agreement that this becomes generally binding. So therefore, the Commission says, okay, to give that power to these social partners in the Sector Social Dialogue Committee, we want to be sure that they have a certain level of representativeness, that they have the right to speak on behalf of the people that we want this agreement to apply to. So that are the three reasons why we are doing REP studies on behalf of the European Commission. How do we do that? First of all, we define the scope of a sector. I will simply quickly jump to the next slide. And how do we do that? It's a definition of by NACE codes. So that is a statistical code of all the economical sectors. So for example, now I'm running a REP study on the chemical sector. So we defined the chemical sector by NACE codes 20, 21, and 22. This is a very political sensitive exercise. It sounds very technical because you see here like which NACE codes are take in or take not, but it's very political sensitive. Why? For the trade unions, this definition, for example, of the chemical sector was absolutely harmless because Industrial, who is involved here, is covering all the three NACE codes, both 20, 21, and 22. So for them, there was no problem. For the employers, on the other hand, the chemical sector employers organization is only covering 20 and 21. And in a number of European countries, they have also plastics and rubber, NACE Code 22, but in a number of other countries, the employers are not organizing NACE Code 22 rubber and plastics. So that means that, in fact, there are also employers' associations in a lot of countries for rubbers and plastics that are separated from the chemical association. So this whole definition of the sector is for us very important, but it determines later on the rest of our exercise. Then we send, as soon as this is agreed, we send a questionnaire to our national correspondents in all the member states. They collect data. We put that all together. We check it very thoroughly. It's a lot of work to check it if it's correct. So for all the unions in every country in this sector, for all the employers' organization, we check if the number of members, the number of employees in the sector, we check their involvement in social dialogue, in collective bargaining, their organizational capacity. So then the contractor is making an overview report, and this is sent to the social partners. So they need to check it, they have the possibility to give feedback, and then at the end it's published on our website. So there are two ways how we assess the representativeness of this European organization. First of all, a top-down screening. Secondly, a bottom-up screening. The top-down screening is very easy. We ask the trade unions and the employers' organizations in the sector. For the electricity sector, it was Industrial and EPSU. At the trade union side, and at the employer side it was Eurelectric. For the chemical sector, Industrial as trade union, and as employers ECEG. And in the tourism sector, we have done also a rep sector. Kirsten Howald can give you more details because she was involved in that. I think it happened a year ago or something like that. So so we asked their affiliates. And then our national correspondents are going, so we ask the affiliates of Industrial, the affiliates of the employers' organization in the sector, and then we look at all the details of all these affiliates. That's the top-down screening, very easy. The bottom-up screening is that our national correspondents are going to look if there are any other national organizations in a country that are also organizing in the sector at the trade union or at the employer side that are involved in collective bargaining in one or the other way. So, and they need to be affiliated to some kind of European organization. So it could be that we find out, for example, that there is a trade union which is organizing in the sector concerned, which are involved in collective bargaining in that country, are affiliated to a European organization, which is then eventually another one than the one that we were looking at from the beginning. This looks a bit complicated, but if I explain it, it will become very simply. There are 4 ways of things that we might discover in our study at the national level. Congruence, sectionalism, overlap or sectional overlap. Congruence means that the affiliation of a trade union or an employer is exactly the field of the sector that we had defined by the NACE code. So that means that the whole sector, all these 3 NACE codes, as I told you before, the trade union as member in the whole area. Sectionalism is that only a part of the sector as we defined is covered by a trade union or an employer's organization. Overlap means that the whole sector as it is defined is covered, but even more than that, the trade union has also members in other sectors. And sectional overlap is, you can already deduce it from the pictures, you only cover a part of the sector, but you have also parts of other sectors. So with that, we would of course believe that if it would be perfect, if it would be congruence everywhere, it would be very easy. But the reality of course is that it's often a little bit more complex like that. So representativeness is not a 1 or a 0. It's like, yes, organizations are representatives, but only up to a certain degree. Because in certain countries there is sectionalisms or there is sectional overlap, and that is then a bit limiting the general representativeness of the organization. So at the end, the outcome of the exercise is a report which looks like this. There is a small summary in the beginning. You can find these reports on our website. A first part is presenting the sector. What are the employment and economic trends in the sector? Second part is presenting the social partners in the different member states. And then the third thing, which is the concluding thing, is the analysis of the EU level organizations, their membership, their capacity to negotiate, and if eventually there are other EU level social partners that are organizing in the sector. So here you can see on this slide the 41 rep studies that the European Foundation has conducted since 2007. So you see also that for 2013 and 2014 we still have a lot of rep studies that are in the process that will be published in the coming months and years. And before 2007 it was the Belgium Christian University, UCL, who was conducting these rep studies on behalf of the European Commission. So they have also done a lot of studies that are available on their website. If you want, you can I can give you this this link to this to where you can find these rep studies. But it's not so difficult if you would put in Google representativeness studies. We have tested it. You will come immediately to this page. And I would recommend you to take a look at it. Might be interesting in certain ways, but at least like that, then you know what this is about. Interesting could also be our industrial relation country profiles, I told you already. And what I wanted to say to conclude is also that for next year's work program, we have a comparative analytical report that we planned to look at how representativeness of social partners is defined in the different member states. So what are the criteria, the national criteria in Belgium, in Spain, in Italy, for trade unions, for employers to become recognized as a social partner for social dialogue and for collective bargaining reasons. So a last thing that I wanted to say, and I have 2 more slides, just presenting you a first glance of it. This year we're conducting a rep study for the cross-sector social dialogue. So that means that we are studying the degree of representativeness of the ETUC, Business Europe, CEP, and EU APME, the ones at the cross-sectoral level. And next week, my colleague Christian Wells, who is doing this rep study together with me, will present for the first time to the social partners this rep study. So I cannot give you all the findings yet. That will be finalized by the end of the year. So in December or beginning next year, you will find this rep study on our website. But here you can see already like the number of trade unions and employers organizations in each of the EU member states. And there, I think you can quickly see that pluralism, so cooperation between different trade unions and different employers, is the rule out of Europe, which makes social dialogue and collective bargaining not easy. But I think we talked about it earlier, about cooperation, coordination. I think there's no way around it. The only country is Latvia, Latvia, where I see only one. So there were LBAS, I think, is the single trade union confederation. So it's the only country where they don't need to coordinate, so lucky ones there. Another slide, and we will develop a little bit more on that, is here you can see 2 figures that might be interesting. For the moment, I think the density approach has been very strong for us. So we have been very much looking at the number of employees in a sector or the number of employees in a certain country and divided the members of a trade union by the numbers of employees to get the trade union density. And here on this slide you can see in blue the employer density, so the number of employees working in companies that are affiliated to an employer's organization, and in green, the union density, the percentage of workers affiliated to trade unions. You see a huge variety, and I think out of this cross-sector rep study, we're going to find a lot of other kinds of data and I see Koen already thinking with a lot of doubts. If there are still mistakes in it, I can reassure you, this is just a first version of the slide. So then you can still give feedback on that. I hope this was inspiring and not too boring for you. Thank you very much for your attention.
Chiedo solo a Gabriele di darmi...
I would like Gabriele to...
Vi prendiamo per stanchezza.
We know you're all tired, I know. I would like to thank Peter because with his presentation, you helped me very much, and our email conversations, of course, were important to reach our goals, but our problem was the overlapping and the consistency of the various sectors in terms of having visibility with reference to all this. Whereas, for example, in the ETUI activities, they have much clearer activities for us to understand. The activities of Eurofund were not, but now they are, thanks to the new elements you added and the opportunity you gave us. You'll never get rid of us because you will always be considered as a privileged speaker, and we'll try to get you involved in other initiatives of ours. Look at the bright side. That's well, I think that the focus on the various data sources can be taken back to an element that Peter highlighted very well, namely the NACE codes. The NACE code, and for our Italian colleagues, they are the activity code that we find in the Chamber of Commerce certificates and the qualification of various enterprises with a different transcription. They are the transposition of that. I would like to ask, and I would like to open the very short debate, the 15-minute debate, what type of suggestions Romek and Peter, and also Peter because he's the one that started this data pathway, so to speak. What type of suggestions do you feel like giving to those trade unions that, like us, find themselves at the beginning or at the end of a pathway? I don't know where to see it, whether the beginning or the end. Perhaps also the end of one piece or the beginning of something of even greater scope. Not to standardize, but because I think that standardization is much more complicated, but rather to normalize. What type of advice do you feel you can give us with reference to possible guidelines to give to trade unions like us that embarked on this, and so after this research they want to produce something tangible, something practical, and they want to give a soul to these figures and to this data? We focused on many elements, on many efforts, and now we ask the doctors in the medical sense of the term. And what advice do you think you can give us with reference to this element?
Okay, thank you very much for this very interesting question. I was a bit puzzled 3-4 weeks ago when I was invited for this meeting, and when I heard slightly coming the question of would it be possible to combine Romex or the ETUI, EWC database and our representativeness studies. I thought, what the hell is that here? These things have absolutely nothing to do with each other. But since Volker insisted a little bit, I took the idea serious and I thought it over several times. So I was questioning myself, how could you make, you as trade unions, you as EWC members, how could you make use or what could this data out of, or these reports out of these rep studies have any significance for you? So I thought about two ways. Of course, who am I to limit you on this? If you have any other ideas how to make good use out of it, go ahead. But I think there are two ways how you could make good use out of it for your trade union work. First of all is a lot of European Works Council members are member of a trade union, but not all of them. It happens that you are in the European Works Council where you have sometimes a member who is very active, very constructive, but not a member of a trade union. And sometimes there are people who are like coming from a country where there's in your company absolutely no organization structure. And then after a while, if this representative becomes very active, he or she might be interested to become eventually a member of a trade union, but he might maybe, or she might maybe not immediately know which one. In that case, I could say maybe at that moment it would make sense to go and look at the rep study of the sector where this multinational is involved in and look at which are the trade unions that are organizing in that specific country, that sector, and like that you could give some information to this person on the basis of this data. I don't know if this makes sense, but that was my first idea that I came up. A second one is that you have a lot of European Works Councils. Volker again knows that best of all, who are developing a negotiation capacity, and some of them are even making agreements. There are even other things that happen that sometimes trade union coordinators in the European Works Council sign on behalf of European industry federations. I will not look at them. But if you would do something like that as a European Works Council, make an agreement with management, or if you would sign a document on behalf of a certain trade unions, then such a rep study might eventually, it's not completely fit for purpose, it's not 100% fitting the exercise, because it doesn't mean that trade unions and employers representative in a certain sector will definitely also be representative for a certain multinational company, but it could be a start of the exercise. So what I am like not telling you to do, because this is your role, but it could be like, imagine you make an agreement that is going to have a significant impact on the working conditions of workers in a multinational company in different countries. You could then eventually go and take a look at which are the trade unions that are organizing this sector in the different countries. Why the hell would you want to do this? Now, we all talk about collective bargaining, the power of trade unions and employers in collective bargaining. You had it very much centralized long time ago. There's the trend of decentralization. In a certain way, the agreements made by multinational companies are, this is indicated in studies, a little bit eroding the negotiation capacity of trade unions and social partners at sectoral level in the different countries. So it could be relevant that you look at, before you make such an agreement, that you inform and consult the trade unions in that sector involved to avoid that you are hindering collective bargaining in a sector in a certain country. These are my two ideas, what I thought how you could, as a trade union, make use of information out of these rep studies. If I say stupid things, then you can simply tell me later and or correct or complete me.
Peter.
Okay, very briefly, I will make a more general comment maybe, but I think that the relationship or the position that ETY is in as the European Trade Union Institute is sometimes very difficult, because we admittedly do a lot of useful research, but we are not good at translating it onto national level. And that's where projects like this, that's where national trade unions come in, I think, and it's a symbiosis that we should live actually in, because you are the ones who know what is necessary on national level. You are the ones who know what the EWC members need, what the trade unions who are also involved in the information consultation system, what are their needs, what are their expectations. We do not always know that very well or as well as you do. We try to be creative, we try to meet the expectations, but we are sitting in Brussels. And we have limited resources in terms of people. So if now a project like MuMMIA, if now activities like those undertaken by CGL can marry the national reality and your national research with what we do on a more general basis, I think this is where the most benefits can come from. Because the feedback that we receive quite often is that the research we do on the European level in Brussels is useful, but few people know about it. And this is exactly the dissemination part of our research. It makes little sense if we only do it for ourselves and if it's not disseminated further, if people are not aware of that, if people do not know that there is a database of EWCs that when EWC is thinking about going to court, that they are not alone in that there are more than 50 cases across Europe and 50 other EWCs that have already went to court, and one could learn from that. If the EWC on national level, if the national reps sitting on EWC do not know that there is a database of around 1,000 good and bad practices that could help them in negotiations, that means that it's a resource wasted. And I think that this is exactly where, the project like MuMMIA and our contribution meet halfway. From such cooperation, I think this is a more general comment, but I think that from such cooperation, if you in your project, for your national members and the practitioners really, if you can ask us questions and if you can push us to explore new areas, to provide you with data, this is how I think both sides benefit, because we, from such a participation, the ETY learns as well. We get the feedback on what is important, what is necessary, and this is where the mutual benefit comes into play, I think.
Beh, questo perlomeno è lo spirito.
At least this is the spirit that drove us, as you are saying. I share your view, so much so that for this project we had a great involvement and a strong relationship with the ETUI, and we shared various issues with reference to the data that is rather boring, but it's still very fascinating and interesting. And in including Eurofund in the final conference for MuMMIA, having reached the end of this project, it might be a building block to reason in other ways as well. I would like to ask Gabriele whether there are any questions. Otherwise, looking at Kuhn, looking at all the audience. Just a thing, Massimo. The last 1.5 hours was terrible for everybody. So many complex figures on a topic that is so essential and that will be useful for the future. We have had to contract the political debate. I gave only there were only 3 minutes available for certain colleagues, but they will intervene tomorrow. Tomorrow there will be an all-political session, but those who will have to provide the answers have tools that they provided us. If I were Migliorini, I see her here, I say, today a delegate came to my office and said, my company is called Giovanni. I would like to set up an EWC. Where do I find in Europe trade unions that are committed, involved, and that have something written in this company? Marinella Migliorini wouldn't be able to give this answer today, but she might say today, look, I'm going to write to Romick and Peter. I'm asking one where this company is present and in what sectors. I will ask the other in what are the trade unions involved in that sector. Perhaps within a week I can give you an answer. This is a question that I leave open for tomorrow.